The unbreakable bond begins. The stars stretched endlessly above as Jake Carter struggled to restart his damaged ship. Sparks flickered from the control panel, but the engine remained dead. His heart pounded. He was stranded. Jake had been on a solo mission, charting unexplored regions of space, when his ship got caught in a sudden gravitational pull. Before he could react, he was crashing toward the surface of an unknown planet. Now, his ship was a broken wreck, his distress signal weak, and he had no idea if help would ever come. He grabbed his backpack, packed with emergency supplies, and stepped outside. The planet was breathtaking. Tall purple trees, glowing plants, and a sky that shifted between blue and orange. But he had no time to admire the view. He needed shelter, food, and water. As he moved through the thick forest, he suddenly felt a presence watching him. His instincts screamed danger. He spun around, gripping his survival knife. That's when he saw her. A woman, or something close to one. She had silver skin with faint blue markings glowing softly under the dim light. Her long, dark hair flowed behind her like silk. Her golden eyes were wide, locked onto him as if she had seen a ghost. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared. Jake hesitated. "Hey, I don't mean any harm," he said carefully. The woman took a shaky step forward. Her breathing was fast, her chest rising and falling as if she were struggling to control herself. Then, in a voice full of shock, she whispered, "No, this cannot be." Jake tensed. Was she dangerous? He didn't know anything about this species, but something about her reaction unsettled him. The woman clutched her chest, her fingers trembling. "You," she whispered, "you are my mate." Jake blinked. "What?" "I don't understand," he said, taking a cautious step back. "Mate? I just met you." She shook her head. "You don't understand. My species, the Zayari, we mate for life. And once the bond forms, it can never be broken." Jake frowned. "That sounds pretty intense." Her expression twisted in pain. "You don't believe me," she whispered. Jake exhaled. This was insane. He crashed on an unknown planet, and now an alien woman was claiming they were soulmates. There had to be a misunderstanding. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm not part of this bond thing." The woman's breathing hitched. She swayed as if she was about to collapse. Her glowing markings flickered, growing dimmer. Jake rushed forward on instinct. "Hey, are you okay?" She grabbed his arm, her touch burning hot. Her eyes met his, full of fear. "If you reject me, I will die." Jake froze. Was she serious? She gasped, gripping his sleeve as her body trembled. "The bond has already started. If you pull away, it will tear my soul apart." A cold chill ran down Jake's spine. This wasn't just some romantic belief. This was life and death. He looked down at her fragile form. She was taller than a human woman, but still delicate. Whatever this bond was, she truly believed in it. And from the way her body was weakening, she wasn't lying. Jake had been on dangerous missions before, faced enemies, and survived against impossible odds. But this was something completely out of his control. His ship was broken. His distress signal was weak. And now this alien woman's life depended on him. Jake sighed heavily. "All right. I don't understand this, but I won't leave you." The woman shuddered in relief. "My name is Lyra." "Jake," he said. Lyra's grip on his arm loosened slightly, but she didn't let go completely. "We need to find shelter before night falls," she said. "This planet is not safe after dark." Jake glanced at the dimming sky. He had no choice. He wasn't just fighting for his survival now. He was fighting for hers. As they moved deeper into the forest together, Jake couldn't shake one thought from his mind. What had he just gotten himself into? Trapped by destiny. The dense alien forest loomed around them, the towering purple trees swaying slightly in the evening breeze. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flora, and glowing blue spores floated like tiny fireflies in the growing darkness. Jake Carter walked cautiously, his mind racing with the events of the past hour. A life bond. Was this some kind of biological trick? A misunderstanding? Or was Lyra telling the truth? The alien woman, Lyra, walked beside him, her steps uncertain. Though she was taller than a human woman, she seemed fragile, as if she were losing strength with each passing minute. Jake couldn't ignore it. Every time he pulled away, even by a few steps, her body visibly weakened. The glow in her skin flickered, her breathing became uneven, and a painful look crossed her face. Jake sighed. So this bond, you didn't choose it. Lyra hesitated, then shook her head. No, it is not something we control. Our ancestors formed bonds through emotion and connection, but over time, it became instinctual. When we meet the one we are meant to be with, the bond forms instantly. Jake ran a hand through his short brown hair. And if the bond is broken? Lyra swallowed hard. We die. Jake exhaled sharply. That's insane. What kind of species would evolve that way? Lyra gave him a small, sad smile. A species that values loyalty above all else. A rustling sound in the trees made Jake stop. He instinctively pulled Lyra behind him, gripping his survival knife. Something's following us, he whispered. Lyra tensed, her golden eyes scanning the darkness. The night hunters, she said in a hushed voice. We must find shelter. Now. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. The moment their skin touched, a strange warmth shot through his arm, deep into his chest. His instincts screamed at him to let go. He had spent his life surviving on his own, never depending on anyone. But the moment he released Lyra's hand, she stumbled, gasping for air. Jake cursed under his breath and tightened his grip. Like it or not, he was stuck with her. They moved quickly, pushing through the thick undergrowth. The rustling grew louder. Something was hunting them. Then, out of nowhere, a low growl. Jake turned just in time to see a shadow leap from the trees. A massive creature lunged at them, its body covered in black, scale-like fur, its glowing red eyes locked onto them like a predator ready to strike. Its claws gleamed under the fading light, sharp enough to tear through flesh. Jake shoved Lyra behind him and raised his knife. The creature pounced. Jake barely dodged in time. He rolled across the ground, his heart slamming against his ribs. The beast snarled and turned its attention to Lyra. She was too weak to fight back. Jake had no choice. He charged forward, slashing the knife across the creature's face. The blade cut deep, and the beast let out an ear-splitting roar, stumbling back. But it wasn't retreating. It was angrier. Jake gritted his teeth. He didn't have a gun. No energy weapons, just a survival knife. And his own instincts. And against a monster twice his size, that wasn't going to be enough. Lyra suddenly gasped. She raised a trembling hand, and the markings on her body flared with golden light. The creature hesitated. It let out a low, confused growl, stepping back as if sensing something was wrong. Jake didn't waste the chance. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward a nearby rock formation. Go. Now. They ran. The creature let out a deafening roar, but it didn't follow. The strange glow from Lyra's body seemed to have scared it off. For now. They reached a small cave at the base of a hill, barely large enough to squeeze inside. Jake collapsed against the wall, panting. Lyra slumped beside him, her skin glowing faintly, sweat dripping from her brow. You saved me, she whispered. Jake shook his head. You saved both of us. She met his gaze, her expression soft but filled with pain. The bond is growing. You are already changing. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Lyra looked down at her hands. When a Ziyari bonds with their mate, it is not just emotional, it is physical. Your body will begin adapting to me. You will feel connected, stronger when I am near. weaker when I am far. Jake felt a chill run through him. Was that why he had felt that strange warmth earlier? This wasn't just some alien romance. Something was happening to him, and he had no idea how to stop it. The struggle for freedom. Jake Carter had faced a lot of tough situations in his life. Hostile planets, uncharted space, even near-death experiences, but nothing had prepared him for this. He was trapped on an unknown world, bonded to an alien woman who claimed they were destined mates, and now his own body was changing. Sitting inside the small cave, he glanced at Lyra, who was curled up against the cool rock wall. Her silver skin still shimmered faintly, but her exhaustion was clear. She looked fragile, yet something about her presence stirred something deep inside him. Jake shook his head, frustrated. This wasn't normal. He needed a plan. "All right," he muttered, forcing himself to focus. "We need to move. We can't stay here." Lyra barely opened her eyes. "I need rest." Jake clenched his jaw. Rest means staying in one place, and staying in one place means more of those creatures coming after us. Lyra flinched at the reminder of the night hunter that had almost killed them. Her golden eyes flickered with uncertainty before she slowly sat up. Jake pulled out his emergency scanner, a small handheld device meant to detect energy signals and life forms. He aimed it at the sky, hoping to pick up his distress signal. Weak signal. No response. He gritted his teeth. No one was coming for him. Lyra watched him carefully. "You are looking for rescue." Jake exhaled. "Yeah, that's kind of the goal. My ship is wrecked, my comms are dead, and I don't exactly have a 5-star hotel to stay in." Lyra's expression darkened. "Even if you are rescued, the bond will not break." Jake froze. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What?" Lyra hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "The bond is permanent. Even if you leave this planet, you will still feel it. You will still feel me." A heavy silence fell between them. Jake ran a hand over his face. What the hell was happening to him? He needed answers, and he needed them fast. No more running. No more reacting. It was time to take control. The journey begins. Jake stood up, adjusting his gear. "We're heading to the nearest Zayari outpost." Lyra looked surprised. "You believe me now?" He let out a dry laugh. "Let's just say I don't have much of a choice. If what you're saying is true, I need to talk to your people and figure out if there's a way to undo this." A flicker of pain crossed her face, but she nodded. "The outpost is a 3-day journey from here." Jake frowned. 3 days? On foot? She nodded again. "Unless you can fix your ship, which seems unlikely." Jake exhaled sharply. 3 days through an unknown world, filled with alien predators, and God knows what else. Fantastic. Still, it was a plan, and Jake Carter was a man of action. Something is changing. They moved through the dense alien jungle, the glow of bioluminescent plants lighting their way. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the distant sounds of creatures moving through the shadows. Jake kept his knife ready, but something felt off. His senses felt sharper. His hearing picked up small details he normally wouldn't notice, like the soft rustling of leaves far ahead or the faint hum of the wind shifting directions. His body felt stronger. He wasn't as exhausted as he should have been after fighting that creature earlier. Was this because of the bond? Jake glanced at Lyra. She walked beside him with careful grace, but she looked worried. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" she asked softly. Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, what's happening to me?" Lyra sighed. "Your body is adapting to mine. Your instincts are adjusting. The bond isn't just emotional, it's physical. You are becoming connected to me." Jake's stomach twisted. "And if I fight it?" Lyra looked away. "It will fight back." Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't like feeling out of control. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. Jake spun around, knife raised. More night hunters. But when the figure stepped forward, it wasn't a creature. It was another Ziyari. The enemy appears. The newcomer was tall and armored, his silver skin marked with dark, jagged lines. His golden eyes locked onto Jake with pure hatred. "You dare touch one of our own," the stranger snarled. Liara inhaled sharply. "Toran," she whispered. Jake tensed. "Great. A jealous alien boyfriend. That's all I need." Toran's hands crackled with energy. His markings glowed brighter than Liara's, his stance aggressive. "You are not one of us, human. You do not belong in our world." Jake gripped his knife. "Trust me, pal, I didn't exactly sign up for this." Toran's gaze darkened. "Then you will die for it." Without warning, he attacked. Jake barely dodged as a pulse of blue energy shot toward him, slamming into the tree behind him with an explosive force. What the hell was that? Toran moved fast, too fast. In seconds, he was on Jake, fists glowing with raw energy, aiming to kill. Jake blocked the first blow, but the second sent him crashing into the ground. Damn, this guy was strong. Liara rushed forward. "Stop. He is my mate." Toran froze. His expression twisted in shock, then rage. "You, bonded with a human." His voice was filled with disgust. "You have broken our laws." Liara stood her ground. The bond chose him. I had no say in it. Toran's fists clenched. "Then you are both traitors." Jake pulled himself up, wiping blood from his lip. "Yeah. Well, I'm getting real tired of being called things I don't understand." Toran's eyes flashed. "You do not deserve to be one of us." Jake smirked. "Well, too bad. Looks like I am." Toran let out a furious roar and charged forward. Jake braced himself. This was just getting started. A race against time. Jake Carter barely had time to react before Toran launched another attack. The alien warrior moved fast, inhumanly fast. His glowing fists cut through the air, crackling with energy. Jake dodged left, barely avoiding a strike that shattered the ground where he had just been standing. Damn, this guy wasn't just strong. He was a walking weapon. Jake had been in fights before, but this wasn't like anything he had faced. His knife felt useless against someone who could probably break his ribs with a single hit. Toran lunged again, his fist glowing with a deep blue energy. Jake raised his arms to block. Big mistake. The impact sent shockwaves through his body, knocking him back. He crashed against a tree, pain exploding through his ribs. Liara screamed. "Stop. Toran, stop this." Toran didn't even look at her. His golden eyes were locked on Jake, like a predator hunting prey. "You are a sickness," Toran spat. "A weakness." Jake groaned, forcing himself to stand. "Man, you talk a lot for someone who can't even land a finishing blow." Toran snarled. He raised his hands, and energy crackled between his fingers. Jake knew what was coming next. A final strike, one that could kill him. Jake braced for the attack. But Liara stepped in front of him. The moment her body touched Jake's, a shockwave of golden energy erupted from their skin, throwing Toran backward. Jake gasped as a surge of power shot through him, like an electric current fusing into his bones. His vision blurred. His body felt lighter, stronger, connected. Toran groaned, pushing himself up. His golden eyes widened in shock. "No, the bond." Liara trembled as she clutched Jake's arm. "He's not just my mate now," she whispered. "He's becoming one of us." Jake stiffened. "What?" Toran's gaze darkened. Then he must die. But before Toran could move, the sky above them roared. Jake looked up. A massive ship hovered above the trees, its metallic surface black as night, lined with deep red symbols. The air hummed with unnatural energy. Liara's face went pale. "No, it's them." Jake frowned. "Who?" Before she could answer, dark figures began descending from the ship. Jake counted at least 6 of them. Tall, lean warriors clad in black armor, their faces hidden behind sharp helmets. Each of them carried a long, curved weapon that crackled with energy. Torren's expression turned from fury to something Jake never expected. Fear. "The Kivar," Torren whispered. "They found us." Jake had no idea who these new enemies were, but he knew one thing. They weren't here for a friendly chat. The Kivar make their move. The lead Kivar warrior stepped forward, his deep voice echoing through the jungle. "You Zayari think you can hide forever?" He sneered. "This planet belongs to us now." Torren took a defensive stance, his body glowing with power. "You have no claim here." The Kivar warrior laughed. "We have the only claim." He turned his masked face toward Lyra. "And we have what we came for." Jake's gut twisted. They were after her. Before Jake could react, the lead Kivar lifted his arm, and a pulse of red energy shot toward them. Jake barely had time to think. His body moved on its own. In one swift motion, he grabbed Lyra, spinning her behind him. The energy blast slammed into his chest. But it didn't burn. It didn't kill him. Instead, it dispersed. The Kivar warrior stumbled back in shock. Impossible. Torren's eyes widened. Lyra gasped. Jake looked down at himself. His skin was glowing. Golden markings had begun to form along his arms and chest, pulsing with the same energy as Lyra's. His body had changed. He was changing. The bond wasn't just emotional. It was physical, biological, irreversible. Jake wasn't human anymore. The battle begins. The Kivar leader's moment of shock ended quickly. He snarled, lifting his weapon again. Torren shouted, "Defend yourselves." The jungle exploded into chaos. Torren charged first, his fists glowing as he slammed into the nearest Kivar soldier. Energy pulsed as the two warriors clashed, sending shockwaves through the air. Jake had no time to think, only act. A Kivar soldier lunged at him, slashing his energy blade toward Jake's throat. Jake moved faster than he ever had before. He dodged, twisting out of the way with unnatural speed. Then, instinct kicked in. His body reacted without thought. He grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisted, and slammed his elbow into his opponent's chest. The soldier crashed into a tree with a sickening crunch. Jake stared at his hands, his breath ragged. He was stronger, faster, more powerful. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting back. Lyra's voice snapped him out of his daze. "Jake, behind you." Another Kivar came at him, blade raised. Jake ducked, then, without hesitation, grabbed the fallen soldier's discarded weapon. It hummed in his hands as if recognizing him. The Kivar warrior swung. Jake blocked. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. His reflexes were sharper, his strikes more precise. For the first time since crash landing on this planet, Jake didn't feel out of place. He felt like he belonged. The turning point. The battle raged on, but the Kivar were outnumbered. Jake, Lyra, and Torren fought together, and they were winning. One by one, the Kivar soldiers fell. The leader, realizing they were losing, let out a furious roar. "This isn't over." Then he activated a device on his wrist. A deafening pulse of energy exploded from it, forcing everyone back. Jake shielded Lyra as the shockwave sent them crashing to the ground. When he looked up, the Kivar ship was rising into the sky. They were retreating. But not before the leader gave them one final warning. "You are bonded now, human." His masked face turned toward Jake. "You are one of them, and that means you will share their fate." Then, in a blink, the ship vanished into the sky. Silence fell over the jungle. Jake sat up, his heart pounding. He turned to Lyra, who stared at him with a mix of awe and fear. Torren, breathing heavily, watched Jake warily. "You are no longer just a human." Jake swallowed hard. He looked at his hands, at the golden energy still flickering beneath his skin. No matter what happened next, one thing was clear. He wasn't leaving this planet the same man he was before. And now, He had enemies who wanted him dead. The truth revealed. The jungle was silent again, but the echoes of battle still rang in Jake Carter's ears. The Kivar had retreated, but their words lingered like a curse. You are one of them, and that means you will share their fate. Jake looked at his hands. The golden markings beneath his skin still flickered faintly. His body felt different, stronger, faster, more in sync with something he didn't understand. He wasn't fully human anymore. Torin watched him with wary eyes, still tense from the fight. The Kivar do not retreat unless they have something worse planned, he muttered. We are not safe. Liara was breathing heavily beside Jake, but she didn't look at Torin. Her gaze was locked onto Jake. Your body has begun the transformation, she whispered. The bond has fully merged with you. Jake exhaled. You keep saying that, but I need answers. What the hell is happening to me? Liara hesitated, then turned toward Torin. We need to take him to the temple. Torin's jaw tightened. Absolutely not. Jake frowned. Temple. Liara looked at him, determination flashing in her golden eyes. There is a place, deep within the mountains, an ancient Sayari sanctuary where the first bonds were created. If we go there, we may find the truth about why you were chosen. Jake crossed his arms. And you think this place will have answers? Liara nodded. The temple holds the history of our people, things even the elders have forgotten. If anyone can help you, it will be there. Torin scoffed. Or it could kill him. That place is dangerous. Even Sayari warriors do not venture there. Jake smirked. Well, lucky for you, I'm not a Sayari. Torin scowled, but Liara took a step forward. Jake, if we do this, there is no going back. Jake looked at her, then at the darkened sky where the Kivar ship had vanished. If he stayed on this planet, they would come for him again. If he left, he might never understand what was happening to him. But one thing was certain, he couldn't run from this anymore. He took a deep breath and met Liara's gaze. Then let's go. The journey to the temple. The journey to the Temple of Origin was brutal. The mountains stretched high above the jungle, their dark peaks cutting through the sky like jagged blades. The air grew thinner as they climbed, and the temperature dropped with each step. Jake felt the strain in his muscles, but he also felt stronger. He had expected to be exhausted, but instead, his body adjusted. His stamina lasted longer, his reflexes sharper. The golden markings on his skin seemed to pulse the closer they got to the temple. Torin noticed. You feel it, don't you? Jake nodded. Yeah. What is it? Torin's expression was grim. The temple is calling to you. Liara glanced at Jake. That means you are closer to the truth. Jake exhaled. He wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. The Temple of Origin. When they finally reached the temple, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The structure was massive, carved into the side of the mountain. Ancient symbols glowed faintly on the walls, pulsing with golden light. The same golden light that now ran through Jake's body. The entrance was marked by two towering statues, their faces eerily similar to the Sayari, except their eyes were human. Jake took a step forward. What the hell? Liara placed a hand on his arm. This is the truth we were never meant to know. As they entered the temple, a low hum vibrated through the air. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling inside Jake became. His pulse sensed with the energy of the temple, as if something inside was waiting for him. They reached the central chamber, where a massive stone monolith stood in the center, covered in glowing inscriptions. Jake felt his chest tighten. He could read them. The words weren't just alien symbols. They were a mix of Sayari and ancient human script. He stepped closer, running his fingers over the carvings. The moment his skin touched the stone, the room lit up. A holographic projection burst from the monolith. A figure, neither fully Sayari nor fully human, stood before them. Jake's breath hitched. The projection spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber. To those who find this place, You are the bridge between two worlds. Long ago, Zayari and humans were not separate. We were one. But war divided us. Our bond was severed, and the Zayari were lost. Only a chosen few could restore what was broken. Accepting the destiny. The air inside the Temple of Origin was thick with energy. The glowing inscriptions on the walls pulsed, resonating deep within Jake's chest. He could feel his heartbeat sensing with the vibrations of the ancient structure, as if the temple itself was alive, as if it recognized him. Liara stood beside him, her golden eyes locked onto his. The truth of their existence had just been revealed. Humans and Zayari were once the same. The bond was not some random biological event. It was a connection lost to time, now reignited within him. Jake clenched his fists. This was bigger than him. Torin still stood at a distance, his expression unreadable. His entire belief system had just crumbled, and yet he remained silent. Jake exhaled and turned toward the massive stone monolith at the center of the chamber. The ancient projection, the voice of a lost civilization, had called him the bridge. But what did that mean? He placed his hand on the glowing surface again, and a rush of memories flooded his mind. Visions of the past. Jake gasped as he was pulled into the vision. He saw flashes of a time long ago. Two civilizations standing as one. Humans and Zayari, side by side, building cities, exploring the stars, thriving together. But then, something changed. The scene shifted to war. A shadowy force, the Kiver, appeared, tearing through the alliance. Fire rained from the skies. Cities burned. The Kivar moved with precision, targeting the bond itself. Jake saw Zayari collapsing as their human mates were taken from them. The pain of separation was crippling. The war wasn't just fought with weapons, it was fought through the very fabric of their existence. Then, one final image. The Zayari elders sealing away the truth. They erased their shared history, convincing the younger generations that they had always been separate from humans, always superior. The bond was forbidden. The connection was lost. Until now. Until Jake. The vision snapped away, and he staggered backward, breathing heavily. Liara rushed to him. What did you see? Jake wiped the sweat from his brow. Everything. The bond. The war. The Kivar didn't just want to conquer the Zayari. They wanted to erase our entire connection. Toren's voice was quiet but sharp. And they almost succeeded. Jake turned to him. The warrior's fists were clenched, his body tense. Toren had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of the Zayari. That belief had just been shattered. For the first time, he looked at Jake not as an outsider, but as something more. Toren took a deep breath. If what you sought is true, then the Kivar will come again. And this time, they will not stop until every trace of our past is gone. Jake nodded. That's why we have to stop them. The decision to fight. Silence fell over the chamber. Liara stepped forward. The Kivar know the bond has awakened again. That means they will come for you, Jake. Jake smirked. They already tried. Didn't work out too well for them. Toren folded his arms. Next time, they'll bring an army. Jake's smile faded. He knew Toren was right. The Kivar didn't fear him. They feared what he represented. The return of the bond meant the return of a force they had once tried to wipe from existence. Jake looked at his hands, the golden markings pulsing like fire beneath his skin. He wasn't just a human stuck in an alien situation anymore. He was something new. Something the Kivar feared. Something they couldn't control. For the first time since crash landing on this planet, Jake wasn't thinking about leaving. He was thinking about winning. We take the fight to them, Jake said. Toren and Liara exchanged glances. Liara nodded. I will stand with you. Toren hesitated for a moment, then exhaled sharply. As will I. Jake smirked. Then let's give the Kivar a reason to be afraid. Preparing for war. They left the Temple of Origin before sunrise. Toran led them toward a hidden Zayari stronghold, a place where the few remaining warriors who still believed in the old ways trained in secret. When they arrived, Jake saw dozens of Zayari warriors preparing for battle. They were different from Toran, less rigid, more disciplined. They weren't following orders from the elders. They were fighting for survival. An older warrior approached, her silver skin scarred from years of battle. She studied Jake with cautious eyes. "This is the human." Toran nodded. "He is more than that. He carries the bond." The woman's eyes flickered with something. Recognition. "Then the time has come." She turned toward the gathered warriors. "We march at nightfall." Jake frowned. "March where?" She met his gaze. "To the Kivar command station." Jake blinked. "Wait, hold on. We're attacking them." Toran smirked. "You said we should take the fight to them." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I was thinking after a strategy meeting. Maybe some weapons upgrades. Not a full-scale assault." Liara stepped forward. "The Kivar have spent centuries hunting us, Jake. If we wait, they will strike first. This is our only chance." Jake let out a slow breath. No turning back now. The calm before the storm. That night, Jake stood on a ridge, looking down at the distant Kivar base. The structure was massive, built into the side of a dark canyon. Hundreds of soldiers moved below, preparing for something. Jake knew what. They were preparing for war. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you afraid?" He turned to see Liara standing beside him. Jake exhaled. "A little." Liara smiled softly. "Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake." Jake looked at her, the golden light from their markings glowing softly in the night. "You're stuck with me now, huh?" he said with a smirk. Liara tilted her head. "No." She took his hand in hers. "I chose this." Jake swallowed. For once, he didn't have a sarcastic response. For the first time, he realized this bond wasn't just fate. It was a choice, and he was choosing to fight. The final stand begins. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the Zayari warriors gathered, their weapons charged with energy. Jake stood at the front, knife in one hand, energy weapon in the other. His body felt alive with power. He turned to his newfound allies, his new people. "This is it," he said. "No more running. No more hiding." He raised his weapon. "We end this. Now." The warriors roared in agreement, and with that, they charged toward the Kivar base, toward their final battle. A new future begins. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting long shadows across the jagged cliffs surrounding the Kivar command station. Jake Carter stood at the front of the assembled Zayari warriors, their silver skin glowing faintly in the early light. They were ready. He was ready. The truth had been revealed. Humans and Zayari were once one people. The Kivar had spent centuries erasing that truth, ensuring the bond between their species remained severed. But the bond had returned. Jake could feel it, alive inside him, connecting him to Lara in a way that defied logic and science. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was power. He adjusted the grip on his weapon, scanning the enemy base below. Toran stood beside him, his golden eyes sharp and focused. Liara was on his other side, her energy pulsing in sync with his own. Jake took a deep breath. It all ends today. The final assault. Had Jake's signal, the Zayari warriors moved as one. They slipped through the rocky terrain, their bodies blending into the shadows. They weren't just an army. They were ghosts, a force the Kivar had spent years hunting but never destroying. The first explosion shook the base. Toran's team had sabotaged the power grid, sending a surge of fire and smoke into the air. Kivar soldiers scrambled in confusion as alarms blared. Then, before they could react, the Zayari struck. Jake led the charge. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the truth, for Liara, for every Zayari who who had lived under the weight of a lie. The first Kivar soldier lunged at him, blade crackling with energy. Jake dodged, too fast. His reflexes were sharper now, his body in perfect sync with his instincts. He countered, slamming his blade into the soldier's armor and sending him crashing to the ground. Another Kivar charge. This time, Jake didn't hesitate. His body moved on its own. He twisted, evading the attack, then brought his weapon down in a swift, precise strike. The golden markings on his arms flared with light. The bond was making him stronger. He wasn't just fighting like a Zayari. He was becoming one. The battle turns. Toran and Lyra fought beside him, their energy blending with his in perfect harmony. The Kivar soldiers were fast, strong, relentless. But Jake was faster. For every soldier that came at them, he countered. For every strike aimed at Lyra, he blocked. He wasn't fighting alone. He was fighting with her. But then, a shift. The Kivar commander stepped forward, his armor darker than the others, his energy pulsing with raw power. "You should not exist," the commander growled, his red eyes locked onto Jake. Jake smirked. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The commander raised his hand, and the air shook. A blast of red lightning shot toward Jake. He barely had time to react before Lyra shoved him aside, taking the full force of the attack. Jake's heart stopped. Lyra collapsed. The markings on her body flickered, her breathing shallow. Jake's vision blurred with rage. Something inside him snapped. The bond wasn't just a connection anymore. It was a force. A storm of energy rushed through his veins, burning like fire. Jake stood, his golden markings flaring with light so bright it lit up the battlefield. The Kivar commander staggered back. Impossible. Jake didn't give him time to react. He moved faster than he ever had before. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he was behind the commander. Jake struck. His blade sliced through the air, meeting the commander's chest plate. The armor cracked under the force, energy bursting outward like shattered glass. The commander let out a strangled sound. His body convulsed, his red energy turning to dust. Then, silence. The commander fell, and with him, the Kivar broke. Victory and a new future. The remaining Kivar soldiers saw their leader fall, and they ran. Within minutes, the battle was over. The Zayari stood victorious. But Jake wasn't celebrating. He dropped to his knees beside Lyra, his hands shaking. "Hey," he whispered. "Come on, don't do this." Her eyes fluttered open. "You won." Jake let out a shaky breath. "We won, but you have to stay with me." "Okay." She gave him the faintest smile. Always. The golden light of the bond pulsed between them, and for the first time, Jake understood what it truly was. Not just a biological reaction. Not just fate. It was two souls becoming one. Lyra's body absorbed his energy, and slowly her breathing steadied. She was alive. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He pressed his forehead against hers. "You scared me." Lyra's voice was soft. "That's how I felt when you crashed onto my world." Jake laughed. A real, exhausted, relieved laugh. Toran approached, his expression unreadable. But instead of his usual scowl, he bowed his head slightly. "The battle is won. The truth is ours again." Jake stood, pulling Lyra up with him. He looked around at the surviving warriors, at the battlefield that no longer held fear, but hope. Lyra squeezed his hand. "What happens now?" Jake exhaled, scanning the horizon. He had come to this planet as an outsider, an accident, a survivor. But now, he belonged here. Jake turned to the warriors. "We rebuild," he said, "together." Epilogue. The legend of the bond. Months later, the Zayari homeworld was no longer a place of hiding. The elders had been forced to acknowledge the truth. The bond had returned. And with it, the unity they had lost. Jake stood at the edge of a reconstructed city, watching the people move with new purpose. Lara approached, slipping her hand into his. "You know, they still talk about you." Jake smirked. "Good things, I hope." Lara laughed. "They call you the first bonded human in centuries, the one who reignited what was lost." Jake shrugged. "That's a long title." Lara raised an eyebrow. "Would you rather mate of the future queen?" Jake choked. "What now?" Lara grinned. "The people want me to lead." Jake blinked. "So, you're saying I'm dating a queen now?" She tilted her head. "Mates for life, remember." Jake sighed, but he was smiling. "Guess I better get used to it then." Lara's golden eyes met his. "Are you happy?" Jake looked at her. At the city, at the stars above, at the place that had become his home. And he smiled. "Yeah," he said, "I really am."